We begin with breaking news. President Trump has just confirmed by tweet a White House proposal that was first reported by the Washington Post to transport migrants in DHS custody to sanctuary cities represented by the president's Democratic opponents. All right, two sources familiar with the information tell NBC News that the administration's thinking was, quote, why release migrants into Yuma or Phoenix near where they were apprehended when you can release them in San Francisco where they want them, referring to the Bay Area's designation as a sanctuary city. Another source says the plan was designed to, quote, somehow hurt Pelosi, referring to the Democratic House Speaker. So let's take a look at sanctuary cities, what they are, and how they work. First of all, there is no one definition of a sanctuary city. It's a catch-all phrase that refers to cities, counties, and states across the country that are seen as more friendly to undocumented immigrants. First, it starts with with ICE detainers. They are documents like this one, which ICE sends to local law enforcement when someone in local custody is determined to be in the country unlawfully. ICE asks the local police to hold the person beyond when anyone else would be released, so ICE agents can pick the person up from a secure location and take them to begin the removal process. Now, these documents are requests. Cities and countries across the country say they will not honor them under any circumstances. They require a court order to hold the person who is requested. Then there's identification. This is a sample New York City ID card that any resident of the city can get regardless of their immigration status. This is a way for undocumented immigrants to be able to have a government-issued ID needed for all kinds of daily activities. Other areas like Washington, D.C., Vermont, Massachusetts, and 10 other states issue driver's licenses regardless of your immigration status. And finally, some municipalities listed as sanctuary cities simply don't stop people based on suspected unlawful presence in the United States, like Los Angeles or Columbus, Ohio. They ignore the president's call for a crackdown on undocumented immigrants. Now, keep in mind the various definitions of sanctuary cities. This map shows the states that either have cities or counties that qualify under any of these criteria or qualify based on statewide policy. The issue here is that a lot of these municipalities say, we're not sourced up to do government immigration policy, and if people think that by reporting things to the police or coming forward, that will result in deportation or something else, people just won't report some crimes.
But let's not conflate things. People think that you are looking at undocumented immigrants who are actively breaking the law and it's being ignored.
Right.
What these cities are saying, we're not going to detain people or go through that effort merely based on the suspicion that they might not be here.
If they are criminals, if they've committed criminal activity or are suspected to, they will get arrested just like anybody else would and held and tried.
Correct. Joining us now, somebody who actually knows a whole lot about this, NBC News national security and justice reporter Julia Ainsley. Here's the thing. The plan that the White House wanted to do this didn't get enacted. Why is that? It wasn't that the president didn't change his mind.
That's right, Stephanie. It seems that, this was something that was obviously weighing politics over safety. If this is an administration that builds itself as one that is interested in trying to keep dangerous immigrants out of America, they would actually be doing the exact opposite by busing them internally into the interior of the country and releasing them. And this could even be without doing a criminal background check and knowing who they're releasing where. In this case, though, it seems that the public messaging on this, or the news that was reported today, actually went the other way. Rather than the administration saying, no, we're not going to do this, which is what we first heard this morning, that this was something floated and then immediately dismissed, it's now called the presidency or something perhaps tough enough. And so we're seeing once again that it's politics over reality and safety and logistics that is really catching the ear of this president right now. And I think it says something about where he stands on immigration and how it's such a political issue for him, because he knows it does well with his base, regardless of what it actually means for people in their lives and living in the interior of the United States.
Okay, let's talk about the plan that the administration had to have the military build and run detention camps. That it's under current law, that would be illegal.
Right. So there's something called posse comitatus, and it's an act that keeps the military from enforcing domestic law. You can think of a lot of reasons throughout human history why you don't want your military to enforce domestic law, and immigration is one of them. And so they are not supposed to interact with immigrants. This even comes down to medical care. It seems like we could be able to use the troops at the border to help with medical care. That's one way they aren't supposed to interact. Now we know that they are being thought of to use as construction people, to be building tent cities, places that could go up overnight to circumvent what can be a bureaucratic process, but it would move potentially beyond building. This is one thing that was floated. We were told dismissed, but as we've learned from our reporting recently, the president sometimes is pushing things that even are supposed to be illegal. And so this idea was to actually have the military running the camps. They would be there perhaps checking immigrants in. It takes a lot of manpower to be able to run a detention center, especially for these that were supposed to be built for families that are coming across the border.
But hold on a second.
It was explained to me by Border Patrol today that they needed the military. Yeah.
Then who would build and operate these? Because we know that there is an onslaught. We're beyond capacity for the amount of people that are coming through. It's a separate issue to be spending all of this massive amount of money farming it out to private prisons. So who is the right organization to be doing it?
Well, the case was made to me today by people in the Border Patrol that they would like to see troops come engage on building this because they think they can do it in a faster process. One thing we learned last summer when they built these tent cities to house separated migrant children is that it is triple the cost at some point when you build something overnight and you don't go through a competitive bidding process where someone has to show you that they can build it for cheaper than the other guy. But what they want here is expediency. They want to be able to build tent cities in Donna, Texas, and El Paso to get these things up as quickly as possible. And I should point out that in 2016, under the Obama administration, they did have a tent city in Donna, Texas. That was temporary, though. That was seen as a temporary fix. In this case, it's not clear how long they would be there, and critically, who would run them? Because even if they build these things, it is illegal to have the military come in and run them, although apparently that idea was still floated despite the fact that they are not supposed to have troops interacting with immigrants.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.